Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm here with Vince Marvin today, and we're going to chat about how he was recently promoted to his first engineering leadership role about 6 months ago. And his story is pretty unique. He is stepping into a role where his entire team is remote, which brings on some interesting challenges in addition to the normal challenges you have when you step into your first leadership role. So I wanted to bring Vince on to kind of share, his experience, his story, and his best practices and what he's learning so far for any aspiring leaders out there or people who are already in leadership roles. Vince, would you mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about, where you work, what you do, and what your day to day is like?
Hello, everybody. I'm Vince Marvin. Again, thanks, Doug, for having me on. This is awesome. So I am the current structural engineering supervisor at Lake Superior Consulting. We are a engineering firm in the energy industry. I currently have a team of 4 people that report to me. 2 of them are engineers, and 2 of them are CAD technicians. Um, and yeah, like you said, they're all remote, which is a little bit of a tricky situation when
Yeah.
it comes to managing people. I'm based here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, um, and overall, my team, 2 of them are in the Duluth, Minnesota area. One is in Texas, and one is in Oklahoma. So it has been, like I said, on top of all the regular challenges that you have, um, you know, trying to work through the dynamic of everybody being remote has been another added complexity to the job.
Yeah. I would imagine time zones, I don't have my geography straight with all the locations you said, but I would imagine that's a challenge too, just everyone being ready at the same time and being available. I guess, has that been a problem?
Yes and no. So I think the Pittsburgh office is the oddball out. We're fairly small, but we're the only ones in the Eastern time zone. I think all of our other offices are in Central. So for them, they're all in the same time zone. I think like I said, we're the oddball out here. Um, but it is only an hour difference, right? So, for those in Central that get in early into the office, we have some people that start at 7 a.m. We're there at the same time. I start at 8 a.m. and it's the same. So, and I tend to work a little bit later during the day. It's just how I've learned I work better. So, I'm typically still on at the end of their days.
Yeah. Well, this is your first leadership role, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about that in a minute. But what were you doing before you were in a leadership role? How did you figure out you wanted to be a manager?
Like everybody, I started my career as an individual contributor. Straight out of college, I started working for a commercial building consulting firm. We had anything from hospitals to schools to one-story wooden banks. I got really, really efficient at designing these one-story wooden structures. And again, I was an individual contributor, right? Through a couple job changes and everything, I found myself at a company in the energy industry, and we worked in the liquefied natural gas industry a lot.
Hmm.
We had a division that was very big into like cryogenic storage tanks,
Oh, wow.
and so the structural department there, basically, for lack of a better word, supported everything, all the piping, cable tray, conduit, all of that stuff that went from the tank to the processing equipment, things like that. So very, I guess you could say, industrial plant focused, right?
Yeah.
And when I started there, I again was an individual contributor, right? I had projects passed to me and said, hey, you're going to be the engineer on this. My manager was stamping everything, and there was no real leadership, quote unquote, outside of, hey, just working with the one designer, the one drafter, things like that. Ultimately, my time there, I got more comfortable in the role and developed a really good relationship with my boss and my coworkers and everything. And then it was fall of 2019. I was tasked with a bid, and hey, Vince, here's a project, here's a bid we're putting in, go for it. And at that point, I went through and I was the only one on the bid. Maybe I had help from somebody else from an engineering standpoint, but nothing, it's not like I was leading a team at that point. So we went through, we got the bid, we ended up getting awarded the job, and my boss was like, all right, it's your job. Go for it. Go get licensed. And this was in just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. So go get licensed in Utah. There you go. You're going to be stamping it all. And it was like a moment of uh shock almost. Like, this is the first project that I'm ever stamping anything on,
Yeah.
probably what it was probably 8 years into my career at that point. I was like, oh man, I finally get to use my stamp other than just testing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Making
so
sure the
that was
ink
pretty cool.
works.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, um, so that was pretty cool, but that was such a large project. I mean, it was ultimately in the end, it was like $144 million construction
Oh, wow.
EPC engineering procurement construction job. So I mean, it was massive.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just too much for one person to do by themselves, right?
Yeah.
So it was my job, and I had a team. I had one engineer that was 100% dedicated. She was my right hand engineer there, and then I had another engineer that was probably 75% dedicated, and he had a few other projects here and there that would come up. But it was my responsibility to kind of organize the project and divvy out work to each of them, and kind of make the game plan, sit in all the client meetings and weekly project meetings and things like that, and then take the information that I gathered in those meetings and pass them down to my team. And at the time we had two design leads, one for steel, one for concrete foundations. Both of them had their individual team members as well, so it was kind of this true like organization chart within the structural department of this project. And so I found myself basically at the top of it. I mean, again, my boss, my manager was still there and still involved, and but yeah, it was like the first time that I really led a team in the standard sense there. Um, and it just kind of gave me the confidence of like, oh yeah, I can do this, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was scary jumping into management, but I kind of thought back, and my wife was very much like, hey, remember the past 3 years that you've been telling me all about this project and all these issues and everything? I'm like, yeah. She's like, all right, so you've led a team before, so you can get into leadership. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, there we go. You're right. You're right. So, um, for lack of a better, it's not really a grandiose story or anything. I kind of stumbled into it and then decided to jump in head first when I applied for my new position.
No, that's really interesting because it's a common tale I hear about, where people are kind of just thrown into it and then it's sink or swim in a sense. And the people who swim end up finding and discovering, oh, I thought I loved engineering, just by itself. And, I envisioned myself on a path where I was going to, climb as like, becoming a senior engineer or
Hmm.
a chief technical officer or something like that. We don't really think of leadership when we're in college. And then we just kind of discover this path and then all of a sudden it kind of changes everything. And I found that the best managers, the best leaders, the people that make the biggest impact on their teams when they're in those roles are people that came up that way, people that learned how to influence without authority. And that's kind of what you did. You weren't, if correct me if I'm wrong, but you might have been the project leader, but like you weren't their boss.
Right.
So you needed to influence them and get them to cooperate and follow your instructions and you're the one that's overseeing and stamping it, so you're responsible for it. So I don't know, I guess I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Do you see it that way, that you had to influence without authority? And how did you do that? How did you get that done? How did you keep everyone on the same page without being their boss?
You're spot on. I was not their boss by any standards, right? We still had the same boss. We still, a different person was approving our time cards, and it wasn't me for any of them. So it was a little bit of a challenge. I think one of the benefits of me being in that position and kind of, like you said, stumbling into it was, if we got light on work for whatever reason, right? Like maybe we just finished a deadline and okay, we can take a little breather from this project and not have all hands on deck. I was able to go to our boss and say, "Hey, look, my two engineers need other work to do. Do you have other projects that they can work on?"
Hmm,
Right? So,
nice.
I didn't have to worry about that. But at the same time, I also had to balance, if there was other projects and oh my gosh, the department's pretty packed with work right now, you know, who can I afford to give up some time with,
Yeah.
for the next month or so, to go work on this other project. And so, there was that balance that I had to do. Um, and as far as just kind of getting everybody to work together, I was very fortunate. Our department was very well run. Um, our boss was very like, she's the leader you aspired to be, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've tried to mimic my leadership style off of how I saw her and her leadership style. So, um, again, our department was pretty well. Yeah, sure, there are people that butted heads, and yeah, sure, that happens, right? No no relationship, working relationship, is ever going to be 100% conflict free. But in those situations, I found, whether it was me and one of my engineers, whether it was the engineers, whether it was a designer and an engineer, or whoever, right? It was always just best to kind of let everybody cool off a little bit and then kind of have that discussion, right? Typically, nothing was going out that was like, hey, we need an answer in 10 minutes, or the project's going to fail, nothing like that. So it's just, overall about the communication skills, and making sure that everybody is on the same page. And obviously we're all working towards the same goal. So
Yeah.
it definitely, is easier when everybody's on the same page like that.
Yeah. So, did you have any situations where, it didn't go smoothly as far as just the communication, the teamwork aspect of it? I'm sure there was like design issues that came up and whatnot and scope challenges, but like, did you have any situations where someone on the team wasn't pulling their weight or someone, wasn't being clear or someone wasn't following through? Did you have any situations like that? And as the leader, how did you handle it?
Yeah, so I'll take the L on this one. There were definitely times where I was just overwhelmed, right? And
Mm,
so I would go sit in one project meeting, and they'd ask me about the schedule and, hey, when is this going to go out? And I'd be like, I don't know. I got to go talk to my engineer, right? And then I would completely blank on that, right?
mm,
She was in another project call or something like that, and then just slipped my mind. And then the next day, the project manager is asking me again, "Hey, when's that going out?" I'm like, "Oh
mm.
gosh, I don't know. I got to talk to my engineer, right?" And so, I've definitely had those issues where I've dropped the ball on that, and it's I found personally just kind of making the task list and writing down notes and things like that, kind of help me stay on track. Um,
How did you
yeah,
smooth it over? How did I'm assuming some people were ticked off or some people were, and I'm not trying to call you out, but because I've made these mistakes too as a
yeah.
manager. But how did you smooth it over?
Um, I don't know. It's a good question, Doug.
Cooperative team.
Yeah. Um, I think in a general sense, right? Again, my team we worked together very very well. There were a lot of times where there were changes that happened, and sometimes the deadlines get pushed a little bit, and especially if it's because of your own fault all internally, right? It's one thing. Um, and a situation like that where I just completely forgot to do it, it's really just owning up to your mistake, and saying, hey, I dropped the ball on this time. I'll do better on the next one. So
Yeah.
typically in situations like that, that's just the best thing to do is admit you were wrong, and try to work together to move forward. um in a more real sense, I mean, there were some late nights. Not saying, we're pulling all-nighters there, but I definitely remember there were some days where in order to meet a deadline, I would basically go take a dinner break and then come back and keep working. So
Yeah. I've been
um,
there.
I yeah, I feel like a lot of us have. Um, but and it's one of those, obviously I'm not, I never asked my team to like skip a family function or anything just to meet a deadline or something. Um, but if there was something that came up, it's kind of one of those, you just got to be understanding that sometimes when push comes to shove, you may have to put in a couple extra hours here and there. And typically, um, as long as you're not consistently missing deadlines and consistently causing issues, on projects that large, the one or two instances here and there are really they're pretty forgivable if it's, again, not common and not super critical.
That's the key. I'm not going to lie. When I was an engineering manager, you know, I had plenty of biff ups, communication breakdowns. I was, as we wear a lot of hats.
Hmm.
We're responsible for the hands-on, managing a specific project, but at the same time, we're also responsible for updating the entire company on the status of all the projects that are, under our realm, and kind of making sure that information is accurate and, flowing, cleanly and clearly throughout the company and to the customer. So, it's impossible to not let balls drop. What I found, has helped me back when I was doing that work was just building relationships with the stakeholders, especially the ones you're working with on a regular basis, because when you have a strong relationship with that person, not that you have to be their best friend, but you need to build that rapport and build that credibility and that reputation, like you said. Because if it's just a one-time thing, okay, people let it go. People forgive and forget. Okay, that's not what he's really like. That's just what happened this time, and I get it. He's busy. Stuff happens. And that's why I think it's really important to know your team. You're Vince, the person that does this and this and this. They know these things about you. You're not the random guy that dropped the ball.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, and you make a really good point about like the relationship aspect. A project like this, I think it was ultimately a 3-year project between um, the bid process and ultimately commissioning and startup and everything. And it's not like it's a fly by night. Hey, I missed this once, and you're never going to hear from me again. I got to go to the next meeting with you, in 2 days, right? So, um, you do develop those relationships, and you do make a reputation for yourself. And so, um, I'll admit there were times the project manager and we would have really long conversations, and some of them are really good, and some of them were not so great. Um, but at the end of the day, we always shook hands, and the next day we were great. So we just knew that we worked well together. We both had good heads on our shoulders, and we understood the challenges that each other had in our own project roles. And so yeah, I think because I had that good relationship with him, some of those little minor slip ups are a lot more forgivable at that point.
That's the key. You hit on it. Mutual understanding. When
Yeah.
people understand each other, then there's a lot of room for forgiveness and bending and, giving more without expecting, more in return and things like that. Um, as engineers, we forget about these soft skill sides. We think
Hmm.
logic, we think deliverables, deadlines, facts, objective analysis, and then we forget, the soft skills are equally as important in a sense.
Yeah.
It's hard to be effective when you don't, put those things into practice. Nurturing relationships and clear communication, and just showing people that you understand them, and
Hmm.
and then working with them and working together, which, I'm guessing that your manager that you said you had a good manager that was a good role model for you. I'm guessing that this manager had a big impression on that regard, like emphasizing, the soft skills and whatnot. But I guess I want to hear from you. Like, how did your manager impact you? Like, what are the main things that you learned from this manager that you feel like was unique about that person that you probably haven't noticed from other engineering managers?
Yeah. So, um, I guess I'll rewind all the way back to coming out of college. Um, my very first job, we had worked together in that commercial building design firm. Um, she ultimately left there to go to a different position at a different company, and I had ultimately left there, and I had a 9 month stint at another company. And within that 9 months, she had, over the summer, she sent me an email. Um, she's like, "Hey, we're looking to hire. Do you want to send me your resume?" And I was worried. I was scared. Like, oh my gosh, I just changed jobs. Like, how is this going to look and everything? And so,
Yeah,
her and she was my point of contact to like get my foot in the door and submit resumes and everything. But then I also was able to talk to her about like, oh my gosh, like what is this role and what is this company? And like I'm going into a brand new industry. And so,
yeah,
she started the relationship. Obviously we worked together, but like she started the personal type of relationship outside of work of like, you can do this, right? Like we studied together for the PE, we passed the test, right? Like, she kind of was my cheerleader at that point.
that's
Um,
awesome.
and yeah, oh yeah, she was great. And so, because I trusted her and because I had a good relationship with her, great. I'll switch jobs again within a year time frame to go to a company and an industry that I know nothing about just because I know you, we have a good working relationship, and I trust you. right? So
Yeah.
like right off the bat, that's kind of how it started there. Um, I think ultimately her her leadership style is great. I mean, there were times I would have a problem and I would go walk over to her office, sit down, and she would always have time for me. It was an
Yeah.
open door policy type thing. And sometimes it was piddly little, you know, I don't want to say a math error, and kind of minimize that, but sometimes it was very clear cut, like you just needed another set of eyes, right?
Yeah.
And she would catch things like that and
You need
explain it
help
to
getting
me. And
unstuck. You're kind of
exactly,
like a
exactly.
skipping CD or something, if anyone
Yeah,
remembers
yeah,
what that
yeah.
is.
Oh yeah. Some people on here might not know what CDs are,
Yeah.
but some people don't know what 8 tracks are. You could go both ways
True.
on there. Um, but yeah, so she was always there, always willing to listen, even if she was super stressed out. There were times that I could tell she was having a rough day or something. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to bother you, but like I have this question. Can I, and she would always have time. So she was very understanding, very empathetic. I remember there was once I had to take like last minute PTO because something came up, and I don't even think she asked me what's going on or anything in the sense of like prying or anything. She's like, "Well, do you have anything due?" No. Great. Go ahead, take your PTO. Like, I'll approve it. Right. And so, she's very um, very understanding to that. Things happen in life, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes your kids get sick, sometimes your dog gets sick, sometimes, you got friends coming in from out of town and surprising you, and anything can happen, right? And so obviously you don't want to like push the envelope and keep taking liberties there. But if you have that good relationship and that trust within the relationship between you and your boss, I'm much more willing to um, be a little bit lenient on some things like that. I don't know if all companies are like that. I think the company has to be set up, such that if there are anything like that you're trying to take. Um, but yeah, just being understanding is a great aspect.
Well, I don't know if all companies are like that, but I do know that all people are like that. And what I mean is, you know, engineer, right? I'm going to equate something to logic. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction,
Mhm.
Newton's law. And, with people, I consider it the law of reciprocity. If you are, if the, your manager led by making you feel understood, appreciated, heard, they gave you the time of the day, it didn't matter how, as you said, piddly the issue was, they treated it like it was important because it was important to you. They made you feel important. So vice versa, you were willing to go above and beyond for that person. You didn't, I'm guessing, I don't want to,
Yeah. Oh
put
yeah,
words,
definitely.
yeah. Whereas maybe you wouldn't have done that for the company, but you were willing to do that for that manager and that leader. And that's like how I see the, that's how I kind of define leadership in a sense is, you know, it's getting people to want to serve you. And I don't mean like a tyrant or a ruler or anything
Right.
like that, but getting people to genuinely want to help you and want to help you succeed and want to be part of your mission and buying into it. And, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. You know, I don't want to get into my story just because I want to focus on you, but I had a unique experience where I kind of had an irregular route into leadership, and I didn't have a good mentor or leader, to learn from. So I kind of just learned my own way as I went. And what I found was the way to make my team move the fastest, and for me to move fast as well, and to make the biggest impact on my organization and on my team and on the people was to lead that way. Instead of driving dates, instead of driving projects, instead of driving technical skill training by itself, it was focusing on getting to know my people, focusing, and then making them feel like they knew me, and making sure I was hiring the right type of people, type of people that fit into this work environment versus just hiring them based on, oh, they have all this experience, because we worked in a very stressful work environment. I needed people that could handle that, as just one example. So, I think the people play such a big part in it. And I'm just curious, do you feel like as a leader, you place a high value in the soft skills? Like, does that get equal weight? to technical skills and projects and deadlines? Or like, how does that rank in your world as a leader? What's your view on that?
So I do truly think soft skills are extremely important. Um, I've experienced it before with various people of you can be the most technically savvy person in the room and you could be the expert in it, but if you can't explain it to others, and if you
Mm,
can't, really explain what you're doing and why you're doing it, and people don't understand it, they're not going to follow you,
yeah.
right? And that goes anything from calculations to business development to just anything really. Um, and so the soft skills there are really important. And now there's the aspect of soft skills of like, hey, here's my calculation and this is what I did, and pulling together a concise and cohesive calculation package for review and maybe submittal to the client and things like that. There's that aspect of it, but there's also the aspect like you said about relationships, right? I think part of the reason that um, this particular boss had a great team was because she got to know everybody, right? I mean, I had the benefit of knowing her straight out of college, and we had a past working relationship, but like all the engineers that were on the team that had gotten hired in right around the time that I was, she they were all brand new. They didn't know each other prior. And
Mm,
so, she built that relationship. And, I remember we used to have like a monthly or a quarterly maybe lunch just with the department, right? And so we would all it
nice.
was like a potluck type thing that we would do, and somebody would grill burgers and hot dogs, and then everybody else would bring something. And um we would just sit there and chat for the lunch hour instead of, hey, I would typically go for a walk, but instead of that, I'm gonna hang out with you guys and kind of get to know each other. And um so I think that, one, it's a great stress reliever to kind of have those side conversations and, kind of talk about something other than work for a couple
Yeah.
minutes. But I think too, it gets to, it gets you familiar with everybody, right?
Yeah.
One of my
Kind of
engineers,
humanizes everyone. It humanizes
exactly.
it instead of
Yep.
it just being the guy over there that handles this aspect. It's like, no, 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 no. Now you know that person and you
Right.
care and you
Right.
want to learn more.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's, there was one of the engineers that was helping me on the project I talked about earlier. Um, I found out his dad owns a small construction company, and um, he would go help him in the field. He knew how to work an excavator, and so he would go help excavate for his dad's projects that are going on and everything after work. So, he would wake up early and come into work and, work his 9 to 5, which really was like 6 to 3:30. And then he would go out and run an excavator for a couple hours at night. And
Wow.
so, it was just cool to kind of learn about him, and that was his routine and what he was doing. And, of course, like you said, he's not just the engineer that's helping me on this project. He's that person that has a life and has interests. And I think over the years we got to talk about a bunch of stuff between, kind of that construction aspect of things, and home renovations. And I remember asking him if he was installing mini splits in his new addition that he just put on, and I was like so fascinated by it. And
Yeah.
so, we had a 20-minute conversation about heating and cooling in a home. So um it was definitely cool to like get to know him as a human being outside of just the engineer that's helping me. So um in that relationship, I still he still works for that company, and I'll still send him a text every so often to kind of ask how everything's going and everything. And so I still consider us friends to this day in terms of, if he reached out and had any questions or needed something, I'd be more than willing to help him out. Versus if I never got to know him through that, just through those conversations, I'd be like, oh, why is he contacting me? Like, oh, he probably just needs something, right? And
Right.
kind of, it's one of those things where you get an appreciation of people a little bit more.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you learn about people too, just by talking to them for a little bit about something unrelated to work.
Yeah.
Going back to my team when I was a manager, one person I found out was building an airplane. Like hear that again. Building an airplane on, and yeah, in his garage on the weekends. Like it was like a multi-year project. It was like a little private plane, not like a Boeing 747 or something. But no, he was like training to get his pilot license, and he found some like, you know, parts in a junkyard. Anyway, I won't get into the whole thing, but like, yeah, I was chatting with him at lunch one day, and then he brought up, oh, I'm building a plane this weekend. What? You know, another guy restored classic cars. He had like a collection of 15 of them. You know, he
Yeah.
would restore them from scratch. You know, he had like 20 acres of property that he did this, you know, nearby. And so there's all these fascinating stories just by going to lunch and just talking and talking about something other than work. And then, you know, that just kind of attracts you to that person more. Oh, wow. Yeah. There's more than meets the eye to this person. There's more than what you see at the surface. And I just think that's so important, you know, to know who you're dealing with, to know who
Right.
you're working with.
Yep.
Well, that begs the question then, you know, we're talking about the importance of being in person and being present and whatnot. And then here you just became a manager for a team that works remote. You know, I guess my
Yeah.
first question is, have you even met them in person yet?
Yes, I've met some of them. One of the engineers in Duluth. I did take a trip up to that office. That's where our headquarters is. So I did take a trip up there. I went out to lunch with him, and my boss was with me. So the three of us went out to lunch, and um, we had that kind of outside of work conversation, and then we did have a project that we were working on at that point. So we did sit there and talk about the project and everything like that, right? But yeah, so I have met him face to face. The other CAD technician in Duluth, he is new, and I haven't been up there since he started, so I haven't been able to meet him face to face. The other two reports, they are both fully remote, and unfortunately, no, I've only been on video calls with them. I think that is the challenge, right? I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know of a great opportunity that we would be able to meet face to face.
Sure.
Maybe a site visit somewhere. Um, but I think video calls are a very close second in that
Yeah.
sense.
Well, so how did you know your day one or the first 90 days, you know, whatever, however you want to look at it, how did you go about building these relationships and getting to know your team when, you know, a large percentage of them you probably knew you wouldn't have a realistic or practical way to meet them in person for a while?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I showed up day one, and my boss, who I had talked to on video interviews and everything like that, kind of walked me through. Ended up handing me a sheet and of a schedule, basically, of like, hey, here's your next 2 weeks planned out. Right, today you're going to meet these people, and tomorrow you're going to meet those people, and you have this training, and you have a safety training, and you got to learn how to use the time card system, and everything like that. Right, so the onboarding process was really detailed in that sense,
That's
and I
good.
oh, absolutely, I think it allowed me to like really get a hold of everything that was going on. I'm sure there have been times where you've started a job and you just kind of feel like you're sitting there like, all right, what am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
Right? Do I need to be somewhere? Like, is it okay that I don't have anything to do? Right?
I
Go
took a
ahead.
six, sorry to interrupt you, but I took a Six Sigma course program years ago, and it said the number one reason for inefficiency in the workplace is because people don't know what to be doing next. You know, they
Yeah.
don't know what they should be doing or what they should be focusing on. And I just thought it was interesting that you said that. But
Yeah.
go ahead. I
Yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's right. Um, and so yeah, I had this whole schedule laid out, and so day one, at some point, my boss walked me around the office and introduced me to everybody, and these people, I think at the time, two of them were my counterparts. I'm in the structural department. There was somebody in the mechanical department and somebody in the civil department. It's split up at our company between structural and civil there.
Hmm.
Um, and then I met the other people in the office. Some of them were field tech that were just in for the day. Some of them were other engineers and designers and drafters that were there. But a funny story. So we got lunch that day, right? And we're sitting in the conference room, and everybody that's been there is just kind of talking and asking me questions, and I'm just getting to know everybody. My boss was like, "Oh, hey, how's your day going? How many more meetings do you have?" Or somebody asked me that question, and And I think I answered like, oh, I only have one more on the schedule, right? And immediately the regional engineering director who was sitting there eating lunch with us was like, no, 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 you have two. I just invited you to this bid meeting.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay. So,
Okay.
day one, I'm getting, thrown into the fire here with,
Yeah.
working on bids, and it ended up being a pretty large bid, bid effort for the size of projects that we get, which, it was nice to start off with that technical, hey, this is what I'm used to type of thing on top of the getting to know everybody and being familiar. So, um, yeah, I think the mix between, um, the technical side and the onboarding side there, um, really helped me start off on the right foot.
Yeah.
I say all of that to say, in that schedule, I had one-on-one meetings with everybody on my team, and then I had one-on-one meetings with my counterparts in all the other disciplines, so mechanical, electrical, civil. um, I had a meeting with the previous supervisor, the interim supervisor, I guess we can say. um, he's still with the company. He's just in a different department. um, so I had a meeting with him. I had a meeting with, there are two other senior structural engineers within the company. They don't report to me directly. We report to the same boss basically. So I had meetings with them throughout the first couple of weeks of like, hey, this is so and so, this is Doug, and he's not, he doesn't report to you, but he is structural. He does work on this. He will be, you'll be working with him closely, things like that. So just having that pre set up meeting to introduce yourself, it was really good. Um, and to be honest, the one senior structural engineer who's been there for a while, him and I have an ongoing standing
Hmm.
meeting every week that we kind
Nice.
of go over. And some of it is just kind of the social aspect of like, hey, what do you got going on this weekend? And some of it is, hey, tell me about this project, or hey, we just got a couple proposals in that are due next week, or do you need help on any of those? So,
Yeah.
um, I think because we had that first meeting that was, for lack of a better word, arranged, right? It was set up and like, hey, you two are going to be working together. So here you go. Here's the introduction. Get to know each other. Start building that working relationship. I think that's only helped us now moving forward, instead of oh my gosh, I'm afraid to call Doug and I can't ask him this question. I'm going to look foolish by, asking something like this. And, it's just kind of understood. Like, I'm getting new, I'm learning about the company. I'm new to the company. There's going to be questions that I have, and there's no stupid question at that point. And I know who I can go to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that onboarding process was really key to kind of getting me started on the right foot.
And it's good that you had that because I know companies I've worked for did not have great onboarding processes. When I was in a leadership role, I worked to tighten that for our team, but like company wide, it was not. So a lot of people got off on the wrong foot and didn't really get up to speed ever. In some roles, in other departments, and it really kind of held them back and held the teams back. So it's I would imagine that as a leader, when you start growing your team and hiring more people, whether it's in this role or future roles, I would imagine you're going to place a high value on that onboarding process for your team.
Yeah, so I did hire one person, the new CAD
Hmm.
technician that I mentioned in Duluth there. Um, and I tried to mimic. There's a few people on like LinkedIn that I've seen that have good content on onboarding, and the do's and don'ts, and this and that. So between that and then just kind of mimicking it off of my own onboarding process and in my experience there, right? I basically took the template, the Word file that I was given, and said, okay, I'm going to delete out all of this, but I'm going to set up meetings with these people and his counterparts, and who he, a mentor for him, and who he can go to ask questions.
Yeah.
Anything from like, hey, where's a good place to eat lunch, to, hey, who do I go to talk to about, HR stuff, right?
Yeah.
There's always that one person that you need to be the I guess overarching, backup there.
Shadow,
Exactly,
essentially.
exactly.
Yeah.
So Um, so yeah, I try to mimic it off of that, and I think as of right now, he's been with us for a little bit over a month, and at about his 1 month check-in, um, I asked him, I was like, "Hey, how am I doing? Right? How
Wow, I
was
like.
your onboarding experience? And what could I have done better? How can I support you more in your role right now in your first 30 days, moving forward into your 60, your 90, all of that?" So I think, asking for that feedback, I think is one thing that, um, is critical. And I'll admit this was the first person, obviously this is my first official leadership role. This is the first time I've onboarded somebody. So, you know, as much as that new employee is learning, I'm also learning this new aspect of my job and my role. So, yeah, there's it's just a constantly learning new stuff within the role to make everybody around me better and make myself better.
Yeah. Well, I want to emphasize something you just said because I feel like it might have got glossed over because you didn't make a big deal about it. And I think it's so great because a lot of managers don't do this. Asking for feedback for yourself. We're always thinking as leaders, it's kind of our default to think, how do we make our team better? How do we, call out their blind spots and their deficiencies? But we need to proactively, seek feedback from our team. Hey, how am I doing as a leader? How did that work? How did that process work? Am I giving you what you need? And creating an environment where your team feels comfortable to give you honest feedback too.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for taking that approach because most managers are dumbfounded when I bring that up to them. Hey, well, did you ask for feedback from your team? Did you, like they say, oh, well, he's struggling with this. Well, did you ask, for feedback if there's something you could be doing better? No, I never thought of that. So applaud you for that, Vince.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think, feedback is a two-way street, right? I can, as
Round
your
trip.
supervisor, I can, tell you how you're doing, in my eyes and upper management if I've gotten any info or feedback from them. But how am I doing? How is upper management doing? Right? I think, a lot of companies will send out surveys and that are, great place to work surveys and things like that. And I think some of that's great. And I can tell you that we've definitely, taken that and tried to improve upon some of that. Um, but yeah, like in the very basic sense, if I have a direct report, like what can I do for you to help you and maximize your potential here in your role?
Yeah,
I
I
think
love
that's
that.
that's the key to really, having a great team, right? If somebody comes in and they're like, look, I only really like to do concrete design. That's what my background's in. That's what I've been doing for 20 years. I don't really have much steel experience. It's like, all right, great. Let's try to get you one more work that you're comfortable with and that you're good at and that you like doing. And two, if you want to, let's get you exposed on some easier type of projects that have steel and get you more well-rounded and things like
Yeah.
that. I don't want to throw you to the wolves and say, hey, design this 200-foot pipe rack, and oh, by the way, it's got 40-inch diameter pipes and it's four different tiers tall and everything. Like your head will be spinning. I think um it's definitely good to kind of have that two-way street open. And am I doing something that is hindering your potential here? And like we said, you got to get better to get better, I guess, is a
Yeah.
good way to put it, is a way to put it.
Well,
um
I look at it this way, like what you said, if someone on your team is a sprinter, don't try to make them a bodybuilder.
mhm,
Because it's going to take a lot longer, a lot more resources, a lot more time to make them a good bodybuilder. And at the end of the day, they're not meant to be that.
yeah,
So if they're really good at something, focus on pushing them to be better at what they're strong at. Help push them to be the Michael Jordan of that thing versus trying to lift up their weaknesses. I think it's good to expose them to other things and whatnot. But at the end of the day, if someone's right-handed, let them use their right hand. Don't
yeah,
force them to use their left hand.
that's a
Uh,
really good analogy there.
well, thank you. I'd be lying if I said it was the first time I shared that. But if you could go back, day one of your company of this new role where
Mhm.
you're managing a remote team, what's something you would have done differently? with this perspective now, to either get yourself off to a better start with, and I mean, relative to managing a remote team, what's something you would have done differently, you think?
So thinking back, hindsight's 2020. I don't think it's a day one thing that I would have changed, but um, I think I definitely would have started having one-on-one meetings with my team a little bit earlier than I did. I think it was a couple months in before I started having like regular standing one-on-one meetings with them. We would have department meetings and everything there, and um, everybody could say what they're doing and what they're working on and what resources they need and what their schedule's like and if they're overloaded or anything like that. But I didn't have those one-on-one meetings until a couple months in. And I think that would have helped
Hmm.
jumpstart getting to know them and them getting to know me a little bit better. Just forming that relationship and kind of, starting everything off a little bit smoother. Not saying it didn't go smooth, but there's always improvements. And I think thinking back, that's one thing that I would have liked to do a little bit better.
Okay, that's fair. As long as you learn from it, then it's
Yeah.
great. What's one of the bigger challenges you've had so far, in this role? And I'm related to it being remote. What's one of the bigger challenges you've had?
I think in general, and I'll touch on the remote aspect, but I think in general, being new into a leadership role,
Hmm.
just the new role and responsibilities. Like I had said prior, the team that I was working with at my past job, if I was running out of work, I could tell our boss and be like, "Hey, so and so needs work," and then it wasn't my responsibility to find them work. Versus here now, being in that leadership role, making sure that your team has productive work to be working
Hmm.
on, or um, you know billable work is probably what most people will hear about, and being utilized and everything. I think that is one challenge to the role, something I'm still trying to navigate through. um I think from the remote standpoint, though, like you had said earlier, one inefficiency is when people don't know what they're supposed to be working on next.
Hmm.
um and so I think, when you're working remote, there is this tendency to spin your wheels a little bit and, hey, I'm stuck on this. I'm going to keep trying to figure it out versus, if we were in the cubicle next to each other, like, hey, Vince, I got a question, right? And, you can easily reach out and do that. Or, if you're in the same office, just going over and walking to somebody else's office, um, versus being fully remote. You could send me a message, and if I'm in the middle of something, I may not see it right away. And then you're kind of sitting there struggling, spinning your wheels, and I haven't responded. And, there's just that little bit of disconnect there.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it can present problems. I haven't noticed it like massively, like, oh my gosh, somebody's been sitting there for 3 days not doing anything, and what the heck's going on? But it just I think the problem is there whether you're remote or in office. I think it just can be overly emphasized if you are fully remote.
A few things that helped me. We weren't a remote company, but I was working at that company when we had to take everyone from COVID, and get
Hmm.
everyone working remote. And we were working remote for, by the time we were still working remote when I left. So we were doing that structure for over a year and a half. And one thing I did, this is everyone adjusting, so your team's used to it. But I did a daily check-in meeting, and I don't know. Then I ended up doing it less than daily after a while. But I did a daily stand-up meeting in the morning, where it was basically just to say hi. You know, and at first it was a little annoying. The team didn't like it. Like, okay, okay, but I think it was just good for people to have that connection. So we just kind of run down. It's everyone's chance to say, here's what I'm working on. I'm stuck on this. Can someone help me with this? I don't know what to do with this. It was kind of just a catch-all, type thing. And sometimes it would just be 5 minutes. I'm good. I'm good. Move on.
Yeah.
And then some days it would last, an hour. Some people had some real issues, and the people that needed the help were on that call, so we stuck with it. So I'm not saying you should do this or shouldn't do it, but that's something that helped me, and just to kind of keep that connectivity. And then the other part was, we had Teams, Microsoft Teams,
Yep.
and I created a channel that was just my team, and that was just kind of like a dashboard to just kind of chat throughout the day. It could be work related, like, hey, does anyone know where to find this? Or it could be, just fun. I watched this on Netflix. I thought it was fun. You guys should check it out. But it was just kind of it was my way of trying to replace that office banter. What you're missing at the water cooler.
At my previous company, when COVID was just starting off, we had that. It wasn't daily. I think it was, we would still have our Monday meetings, and that would be the big full meeting and everything. But then I think 2 other days, maybe Wednesday, Thursday, we would have just quick little, check-in meetings like that, 15 minutes for everybody to go around the horn and say everything. And then we did have my boss started the team's chat with all of us, and it was basically. I don't want to say a daily check-in, but yeah, it was basically like, hey, anybody having internet issues? What's going on? And anybody
Yeah.
having and so, we did have that. I haven't implemented that really at my new position. I think I've tried to check in with people one-on-one a lot more than versus the group setting there. But yeah, you're right. That's a great way to kind of keep in touch and to keep everybody feeling like they're still a part of the team, even if they are working remotely.
Even people who are introverted still feel disconnected, working alone and whatnot is what I found. At the beginning of COVID, I thought, oh man, the introverted people on my team are going to love this, working in isolation, no distractions. But just in talking to them more about it on personal levels at the time, a lot of them, no, they were struggling with it. They were struggling without having that human interaction every day and whatnot. And
Yeah,
just kind of feeling like, oh man, I'm submitting my project to a black hole. Is anyone receiving this? Just
right.
have all these
I
doubts. And I bet as a manager, I guess I'll ask, and you could be honest if you're comfortable with it. But I know for me, I struggled with, okay, are they working? And I hate saying this because I sound like a jerk, but I'm like, when you're not seeing everybody every day, you're just like, and if you go a whole day without chatting, on the DMs or something, it's like, okay, I'm sure people were working today, but at the same time, just in the back of your mind, like, I don't know. And it's just kind of like these things in the back of your mind. I don't know if you have anything like that.
so I've gotten caught up in that a little bit in the sense of somebody will ask me if one of my team members is, how they're doing on a certain project, or hey, do they have availability coming up, or something like that. And they'll ask me in the afternoon and I'll be like, I don't know. I haven't talked to them since 8 a.m. this morning. I gotta check in versus, if we're all in the office, I can stand up at my desk and look over and see like, oh yeah, he's working on that, and then, go talk to him about it. But yeah, I think that is, in the back of everybody's mind working remotely. I'm sure that's always out there. But um I think for the most part, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's all about the communication there. I've given my engineers and designers, I've given them tasks and said, hey, like, in my head, I know that this is going to be a multi-day task. And so maybe it's just at the end of the day, like, hey, do you have any questions? What's going on with it? And, I've checked in with them before, and sometimes it's yeah, I'm just making progress, nothing to report. And that's fine. Right. You don't always have to have questions and comments and everything. But, yeah, I think, you know, like I said, everybody, and especially being in a new role, brand new to being remote and everything, it's like, yeah, I'm sure they're, I haven't heard from somebody in a while. I hope everything's okay, and that they're not doing anything. And like I said, it's just keeping that line of communication open is definitely helpful for that.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, I just have a few more, hot questions for you.
Yeah.
What would be your best advice for someone who's considering, maybe I'm interested in leadership. I'm not sure, and maybe they don't have the same opportunity you had, to like get pulled into a Utah project like that, so maybe they haven't had a chance to dabble with it. What would be your best advice for someone who's trying to explore that and figure out if that's the right path for them?
What you don't want to do is kind of baptism by fire and get thrown to the wolves and get thrown into this position and then and flail and not like it and struggle, all that's the complete opposite thing of what you want to do, and a good way to develop and everything there. So I think, being fortunate enough that to have a larger project that you can be the team lead on, would be great.
Hmm.
It kind of gets you in that mindset of divvying out the work and working with people and building those relationships. if you don't have this massive multi-year project, if that's not how your company operates, maybe it is just one of the larger projects that your company has. I mean, I remember at my first job, the commercial building design, we had some projects that were like 2 weeks, and then we had some projects that were 6 months. On any of those, you can definitely, um, set up an organization of saying, like, hey, I want to have one engineer on my team and one designer on my team, and I'll kind of orchestrate the whole thing, and kind of go that route. I think that's something that, if your company isn't set up for that, and you truly are in I see an individual contributor, and you're typically the one on the team, I would definitely go out and ask your boss, ask your manager, like, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to see if I can, get into this position, and can we find a good project to kind of give me that experience to see
Yeah.
how I do, and I would say, even go as far as to say, like, I still want you involved. I want you to give me feedback, and I want you to be there from a 30,000-foot view versus you're the one leading it. Like, let me lead this project, and kind of help me along the way, help me to learn.
And if you're, for you watching this now, if that sounds a little intimidating, hey, I'm going to go to my boss and tell him I'm interested in leadership. That might sound intimidating to you. To keep this in mind, and Vince, you can refute me on this if you disagree, but when a direct report comes to an engineering manager and says, "Hey, I'm interested in learning how to be a better leader," that's music to their ears, to any engineering manager's
Oh yeah.
ears.
Oh yeah.
Most engineers don't come to the manager saying, "Hey, I want to learn how to be better with people. I want to learn how to lead projects. I want to," And then meanwhile, the managers are always juggling a million balls, trying to keep everything going, and it's impossible to keep up. So, yeah, you're going to be thrilled to hear that someone's interested in that. And at least for me personally, the people that did express interest in that to me, I spent a lot of extra time on them. I was willing to work late to make up for spending time with them one on one to help them and mentor them in those areas because I knew it paid dividends for them, for me, and for the team. I don't
Yeah.
know what your thoughts are on that, Vince.
I fully agree with that. I think, like you said, as a manager, you're juggling so many different balls that, um, you know, having somebody step up and say that they want to, learn a little bit more about leadership and everything, and maybe it isn't a project right away, right? Maybe it's not a, oh, hey, you know what, you want to be a leader here, here's $100 million project, go for it. Maybe it is a, all right, I'm going to delegate something to you, test the waters, see how you do. And, maybe it's a small task, maybe it's a report, or some initiative or something like that. It doesn't have to be a billable project, but, definitely asking the question is the first step, right?
Yeah.
The answer is always no if you don't ask. Like you said, it may be intimidating. Don't get me wrong. I think, as much as I seem like an extrovert, I am pretty introverted outside of the engineering
Hmm.
field, and so I can definitely understand that asking that question maybe cause some anxiety and some stress and everything. But again, I think if you have a good relationship with your manager, and it can be a one-on-one conversation. You don't have to ask in front of the CEO, like, hey, let me lead this project. That doesn't have to happen. So, but yeah, I think that's probably a good first step there.
Well, in hearing your story and just hearing your experience and all this, the biggest thing that jumps out to me is that it probably never would have happened if you weren't comfortable with going outside of your comfort zone. You told me that, that Utah project kind of happened by circumstance and whatnot. And, if you weren't willing to step up to the plate on that opportunity and just kind of figure it out on the fly once you were into it and figure out how to develop your leadership style, I feel like you would have had a whole different path. Is that fair to say? Or am I misinterpreting what you said earlier?
I think so. Every decision we make puts you down a different path, right? And
Hmm.
and so who knows how different that path might have been,
Everything,
right?
everywhere, all at once, right? That
Yeah.
movie.
Would have been in that Utah project, and maybe it would have been the next project in Louisiana, or Arkansas, or wherever it would have been, right? And maybe I would have had another opportunity, maybe on a smaller project. And um, but yeah, you're right. If I don't grab that bull by the horns, and kind of take the role that I did on that one, my path would be a little bit different. Um, and I think like I said, it's all about, um, taking the initiative and wanting to grow, I think is a big thing about it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your story with us, Vince. I think a lot of engineering managers and just engineers who are on the fence about leadership, as a future path of them, I think they're going to find a lot of value in your story and hearing how you've, basically developed your leadership style kind of on the fly as you were thrown into these situations. So I really appreciate you spending the time with me on this today.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. It was great to be here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll probably have you back again. And then for you guys watching, if you're hearing Vince talk about going outside of his comfort zone, and that sounds easier said than done, well, if you want to learn how to escape your comfort zone to accelerate your growth, you should check out my episode on this topic. I'll include a link in the description. Thanks for watching.